I never thought I would be standing in a courthouse at 9 o'clock on a freezing Monday morning in February, defending myself against a homeowners association over ice on a sidewalk that I didn't even create. But there I was, clutching a folder full of photographs and weather reports, preparing to face down Brenda Patterson, the president of the Willow Creek HOA in Springfield, Illinois, who had decided that I was personally responsible for an elderly woman's fall. It all started 3 weeks earlier when I came home from my job at the engineering firm downtown to find a certified letter taped to my front door. The envelope had that official look that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a notice from the HOA informing me that I was being held liable for creating a hazardous condition on the public sidewalk adjacent to my property. According to the letter, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchinson, a 78-year-old resident who lived 2 streets over, had slipped on ice in front of my house and fractured her wrist. The HOA was demanding I pay her medical bills, which totaled nearly $15,000, plus an additional $5,000 in fines for violating community standards. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling more confused and angry. I had been meticulous about keeping the sidewalk clear. Every morning before work, I shoveled and salted the path in front of my house. I even kept extra salt in my garage specifically for this purpose. The idea that I had somehow caused ice to form and injured someone made my blood boil. The next morning, I went outside before dawn to examine the sidewalk. The sun had not yet risen, and the street was quiet except for the hum of a distant snowplow. I walked slowly along the concrete, my breath creating clouds in the frigid air. That was when I noticed something I had overlooked before. About 15 feet from my property line, right where the HOA claimed Mrs. Hutchinson had fallen, there was a thick sheet of ice covering the sidewalk. But this ice did not extend from my property at all. Instead, it seemed to originate from the drainage area between my house and the community park next door. I knelt down and traced the ice pattern with my gloved hand. The frozen sheet was thickest near the edge of the park property and gradually thinned as it extended outward. More importantly, I could see a steady drip of water coming from somewhere above, even in the freezing temperature. I looked up and saw a downspout attached to the park's utility building, which housed the pool equipment and maintenance supplies. Water was trickling from this downspout, running across the sidewalk and freezing in the cold air. My mind raced. The HOA owned and maintained the park and its buildings. This meant the ice that caused Mrs. Hutchinson's fall had come from their property, not mine. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, documenting everything from multiple angles. The morning light was just beginning to break, casting long shadows that actually helped show the water's path across the concrete. I spent the entire weekend gathering evidence. I took more photographs during different times of day, showing how the water continued to flow from the downspout regardless of the temperature. I measured the distance from my property line to the ice patch, confirming it was well outside my responsibility zone. I even went to the county clerk's office and pulled up the property records, highlighting exactly where the HOA's property began and mine ended. On Monday morning, I called the HOA office and asked to speak with Brenda Patterson. The receptionist, a timid-sounding woman named Julie, put me on hold for nearly 10 minutes before Brenda finally picked up. "This is Brenda Patterson," she said, her voice clipped and professional in that way that immediately puts you on the defensive. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Cameron Walsh from 847 Maple Grove Drive. I received your letter about the incident with Mrs. Hutchinson, and I need to discuss this with you. The ice that caused her fall did not come from my property. It came from the HOA's downspout on the park utility building. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Brenda spoke, her tone hardening. "Mr. Walsh, we have documentation that places the incident directly in front of your property. You are responsible for maintaining the sidewalk adjacent to your home. That is clearly stated in the HOA bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your house." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But the ice did not originate from my property. I have photographs showing water flowing from your downspout and freezing on the sidewalk." "This is your maintenance issue, not mine. I have reviewed the incident report," Brenda continued, speaking over me. "Mrs. Hutchinson was very clear about where she fell. The ice was in front of 847 Maple Grove Drive, your property, your responsibility. The HOA board has already voted on this matter, and we expect payment within 30 days, or we will be forced to place a lien on your property." "A lien? You cannot be serious. I am telling you I have evidence that proves this was not my fault." "Evidence can be interpreted many ways, Mr. Walsh. The board's decision is final. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. How could they refuse to even look at the evidence? I had clear photographic proof that their building was causing the problem, and they would not even entertain a conversation about it. That evening, I drove to the law office of my friend Thomas Chen, whom I had known since college. Thomas had gone into civil litigation, and had mentioned once that he occasionally handled HOA disputes. His office was in a renovated historic building downtown, with exposed brick walls and tall windows that overlooked the Sangamon River. Thomas listened carefully as I explained the situation, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against his desk. "This is not uncommon," he said. "HOAs can be incredibly stubborn, especially when admitting fault would open them up to liability. If they acknowledge that their downspout caused the ice, they become responsible for Mrs. Hutchinson's medical bills and potentially other damages. By blaming you, they are trying to shift that burden." "But I have proof," I said, spreading my photographs across his desk. "Look at these. You can clearly see the water coming from their building." Thomas examined the photos carefully, picking up several and holding them closer to his desk lamp. "These are good, Cameron, very good. But here is the problem. HOAs operate under their own bylaws, and they have significant power within those boundaries. They can fine you, place liens on your property, and make your life miserable. Challenging them usually requires going to court, which means legal fees, time, and stress. So what do I do? Just pay them?" "No," Thomas said firmly. "Not if you are truly not at fault, but you need to be prepared for a fight. I would recommend hiring an expert witness, someone who can provide professional testimony about the water source and ice formation. That kind of evidence carries a lot more weight than photographs alone." "An expert witness? Like who?" "A civil engineer or a hydrologist, someone who specializes in water drainage and municipal infrastructure. They can examine the site, prepare a report, and testify if this goes to court. It will cost you a few $1,000s upfront, but it is your best shot at winning this." I left Thomas's office feeling both relieved and anxious. At least I had a plan, but the idea of spending thousands of dollars to fight something that should have been obvious felt deeply unfair. Still, I was not about to let the HOA bully me into paying for their mistake. The next day, I began calling engineering firms around Springfield. Most were not interested in what they considered a minor dispute, but finally, I reached Dr. Patricia Novick, a civil engineer who had testified in numerous water damage and liability cases. Her office was in Champaign, about an hour drive from Springfield, but she agreed to come examine the site the following week. Dr. Novak arrived on a Thursday morning, driving a white SUV packed with equipment. She was in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance. She carried a clipboard, a camera with an expensive-looking lens, and several instruments I did not recognize. "Mr. Walsh," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "show me where the incident occurred." I led her to the sidewalk and pointed out the ice patch, which had grown even larger in the past few days thanks to continued freezing temperatures. "Doctor." Novak crouched down and examined the ice closely, taking measurements with a small digital device. She then traced the water's path back to the downspout, taking photographs and notes the entire time. "This is textbook runoff," she said, more to herself than to me. "The downspout is improperly installed. It is supposed to discharge into a drainage system, or at least away from paved surfaces. Instead, it is dumping water directly onto the sidewalk." She spent nearly 2 hours documenting everything. She measured the slope of the sidewalk, took thermal images showing the temperature variations in the concrete, and even collected samples of the ice for later analysis. At one point, she climbed a small ladder to examine the downspout connection more closely, discovering that it was partially clogged, which caused water to overflow and spill onto the walkway. "This is clearly a maintenance failure," Dr. Novak said as she packed up her equipment. "The HOA is responsible for maintaining this building and its drainage systems. They failed to do so, and that failure directly caused the hazardous condition. I will prepare a comprehensive report with my findings and recommendations. If this goes to court, I am happy to testify." "Thank you," I said, feeling a wave of relief. "This means a lot." "Just doing my job," she replied with a slight smile. "But I will tell you something. I have dealt with HOAs before, and they hate being proven wrong. Be prepared for them to fight dirty." Her words turned out to be prophetic. A week later, I received another letter from the HOA, this time informing me that they were not only maintaining their demand for payment, but were also adding additional fines for failure to cooperate with board directives, and creating a hostile environment within the community. The total amount they claimed I owed had ballooned to $25,000. I immediately forwarded the letter to Thomas, who called me that same evening. "They are escalating," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This is a pressure tactic. They want you to cave before this gets to court. Do you have Dr. Novak's report yet?" She said it would be ready by the end of the week. "Good. As soon as you have it, I want to send it to the HOA board along with a formal response denying all liability. We will make it clear that we have expert testimony supporting your position and that we are prepared to litigate if necessary." Sometimes that is enough to make them back down. But the HOA did not back down. Instead, Brenda Patterson called an emergency board meeting and invited me to attend. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center, a small building adjacent to the park where all of this had started. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying copies of Dr. Novak's report, which was 43 pages of detailed analysis, diagrams, and photographs. The community center was a plain room with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat. Brenda Patterson sat in the center, flanked by 4 other board members whose names I barely knew. To Brenda's right was Gordon Mills, a retired accountant who always seemed to agree with whatever Brenda said. To her left was Susan Delaney, a real estate agent who had lived in the community for over 20 years. The other 2 members, whose names I later learned were Rick Harrison and Janet Kowalski, looked uncomfortable, like they would rather be anywhere else. About 15 other residents had shown up, most of them older homeowners who seemed to attend every board meeting regardless of the topic. They sat in the folding chairs, whispering to each other as I took a seat in the back row. Brenda called the meeting to order by banging a small gavel on the table. This special session has been called to address the ongoing dispute between the Homeowners Association and Mr. Cameron Walsh regarding the incident on Maple Grove Drive. Mr. Walsh, you have been given an opportunity to present your case to the board. You have 10 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my hands slightly shaking as I held up a copy of Dr. Novik's report. Thank you for allowing me to speak. As you all know, I have been accused of creating a hazardous condition that led to Mrs. Hutchinson's injury. I want to be clear that I deeply regret that she was hurt, and I hope she has recovered. However, I am not responsible for the ice that caused her fall. I distributed copies of the report to each board member and began walking them through the findings. I explained how Dr. Novik had traced the water to the HOA's downspout, how the improper drainage had created the ice, and how the measurements proved the hazard was well outside my property line. As you can see on page 12, I said, pointing to one of the diagrams, the downspout is discharging water directly onto the sidewalk instead of into the drainage system. This is a clear violation of municipal code and represents a maintenance failure by the HOA, not me. Brenda flipped through the report with an expression that suggested she had already made up her mind. Mr. Walsh, this is a very thorough document, but it does not change the fact that the incident occurred in front of your property. The HOA bylaws are clear. Homeowners are responsible for the sidewalks adjacent to their homes. But the source of the water is your property, I countered, trying to keep my voice level. The ice formed because of your failure to maintain the downspout. I cannot be held responsible for something I did not cause. Gordon Mills leaned forward, his jowls quivering as he spoke. The bylaws do not include exceptions for the source of the hazard. You are responsible for that section of sidewalk, period. That is ridiculous, I said, my frustration breaking through. You are saying that even if your building floods the sidewalk, I am somehow responsible for it. That makes no sense. Your interpretation of the bylaws is not relevant, Brenda said coldly. The board has made its decision, unless you can provide evidence that contradicts Mrs. Hutchinson's statement about where she fell. We are moving forward with our demand for payment. I just provided you with 43 pages of evidence, I said, my voice rising, from a qualified expert witness. What more do you want? We want you to take responsibility for your actions, Brenda shot back. This community operates on the principle that we all follow the rules. If we start making exceptions, the entire system falls apart. The room had gone quiet, with all the residents watching the exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Susan Delaney, the real estate agent, cleared her throat and spoke up for the first time. Brenda, I think we should at least consider Mr. Walsh's evidence. If there is a maintenance issue with the park building, we need to address it regardless of the liability question. The maintenance schedule is not up for debate right now, Brenda snapped. We are here to discuss Mr. Walsh's failure to maintain his sidewalk. But if the water is coming from our building, doesn't that change things? Susan pressed. No, it does not, Brenda said firmly. She turned back to me. Mr. Walsh, you have 30 days to pay the assessed fines and medical costs, or we will place a lien on your property and pursue legal action. This meeting is adjourned. She banged the gavel again, and just like that, it was over. I stood there, stunned, as the board members began gathering their papers. Several residents gave me sympathetic looks as they filed out, but no one said anything. I realized then that this was not about facts or evidence. This was about power and control. Brenda Patterson had decided I was at fault, and she was not going to let something as trivial as the truth get in her way. I walked out into the cold night air, my breath steaming as I pulled out my phone and called Thomas. "They refuse to even consider it," I told him. "They are moving forward with the lien." Thomas sighed. "Then we go to court. File a formal lawsuit challenging the HOA's decision and seeking a declaratory judgment that you are not liable. We will also countersue for legal fees and any damages you have incurred from their harassment. This is going to get messy, Cameron, but we have the evidence on our side." The next morning, Thomas filed the lawsuit in Sangamon County Circuit Court. The complaint outlined the entire dispute, included Dr. Novick's report as an exhibit, and demanded that the court rule the HOA's actions were unlawful and beyond their authority. We also requested an injunction preventing them from placing a lien on my property while the case was pending. The HOA responded 2 weeks later with their own filing, denying all of our claims and asserting that they had full authority under their bylaws to hold me liable. They also hired their own lawyer, a man named Douglas Pemberton, who had a reputation for aggressive litigation tactics. Thomas had faced him before and warned me that Pemberton would try to drag the case out and run up legal fees in hopes that I would give up. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early March, and I spent the weeks leading up to it reviewing every document, every photograph, and every detail of Dr. Novick's report. I wanted to be prepared for anything Pemberton might throw at us. The morning of the hearing, I met Thomas outside the courthouse, a grand limestone building in downtown Springfield that had been constructed in the 1960s. The interior was all polished marble and dark wood paneling, with high ceilings that made every sound echo. We made our way to courtroom 4B on the second floor, where Judge Raymond Kowalski would hear our case. Judge Kowalski was in his early 60s, with a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. He did not tolerate games or theatrics in his courtroom, which Thomas said was good for us since we had the facts on our side. Brenda Patterson was already there when we arrived, sitting in the front row with Douglas Pemberton. She was dressed in a navy blue business suit and wore a string of pearls that looked like they cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She did not look at me as we took our seats on the opposite side of the aisle. Judge Kowalski entered the courtroom, and we all stood as the bailiff announced him. The judge sat down, adjusted his reading glasses, and picked up the file containing our case. "All right," he said, his voice carrying authority. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Walsh versus Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I have reviewed the filings from both parties. Mr. Chen, you are representing the plaintiff." Thomas stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Pemberton for the defense." Pemberton stood as well. "That is correct, Your Honor." "Good. Mr. Chen, let us start with you. Explain to me why we are here." Thomas launched into a concise summary of the case, describing how I had been wrongfully blamed for ice that originated from the HOA's property. He referenced Dr. Novick's report multiple times, emphasizing that we had expert testimony proving our position. "The evidence is overwhelming, Your Honor," Thomas concluded. "Mr. Walsh did nothing wrong. The HOA is attempting to hold him liable for their own maintenance failure, and we are asking this court to intervene and prevent that injustice." Judge Kowalski nodded and turned to Pemberton. "Mr. Pemberton, your response." Pemberton stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a practiced motion. "Your Honor, this case is much simpler than Mr. Chen is making it out to be. The Willow Creek HOA has clearly defined bylaws that assign responsibility for sidewalk maintenance to the adjacent property owner. Mr. Walsh's property is adjacent to the location where the incident occurred. Therefore, he is responsible. The source of the water is irrelevant to that analysis. Irrelevant? Judge Kowalski raised an eyebrow. You are saying that even if the water came from the HOA's property, Mr. Walsh is still liable? Yes, Your Honor. The bylaws do not carve out exceptions based on the source of the hazard. They simply assign responsibility based on location. If we start allowing homeowners to claim they are not responsible because the problem originated elsewhere, it creates a slippery slope that undermines the entire system. That is absurd, Thomas interjected. You cannot hold someone responsible for a hazard they did not create and had no ability to prevent. Counsel, Judge Kowalski said, raising a hand. I will decide what is absurd. Mr. Pemberton, have you reviewed the expert report submitted by the plaintiff? I have, Your Honor. And while Dr. Novick is certainly qualified, her opinion does not change the legal framework established by the HOA bylaws. Judge Kowalski leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the bench. Here is my concern, Mr. Pemberton. If the HOA's own property is creating a hazard that injures someone, it seems to me that the HOA bears some responsibility for that. You cannot just pass the buck to the nearest homeowner because it is convenient. Your Honor, the bylaws are a contract that all homeowners agree to when they purchase property in the community. Mr. Walsh knew what he was signing. A contract cannot require someone to do the impossible, Judge Kowalski countered. If the water is coming from the HOA's building, how is Mr. Walsh supposed to stop it? Is he supposed to trespass onto HOA property and fix their downspout himself? Pemberton hesitated, and I could see he had not expected the judge to push back so forcefully. Your Honor, the HOA is willing to address the maintenance issue with the downspout, but that does not absolve Mr. Walsh of his responsibility to keep his sidewalk clear. Except he did keep his sidewalk clear, Thomas said. He shoveled and salted regularly. The ice formed because of water continuously flowing from the HOA's property. He had no way to prevent that. Judge Kowalski nodded slowly. I am inclined to agree with Mr. Chen on this. However, I am not going to make a final ruling today. This is a preliminary hearing, and I want both parties to have an opportunity to present their full case. We will schedule a trial date for next month. In the meantime, I am issuing a temporary injunction prohibiting the HOA from placing a lien on Mr. Walsh's property or taking any enforcement action until this matter is resolved. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, Thomas said, barely suppressing a smile. Pemberton looked less pleased but nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good. We are adjourned. As we left the courtroom, I felt a surge of relief. The judge had clearly seen through the HOA's argument, and the temporary injunction meant they could not financially harm me while the case was ongoing. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The real battle would come at trial. Over the next few weeks, both sides prepared their cases. Thomas took depositions from several witnesses, including Mrs. Hutchinson, who turned out to be a sweet, soft-spoken woman who felt terrible about the whole situation. She testified that she had fallen near my property, but could not say for certain where the ice had come from. She also mentioned that she had seen water on the sidewalk in that area several times before her fall, which supported our argument that this was an ongoing problem caused by the faulty downspout. We also deposed Brenda Patterson, which was an experience I would not soon forget. She sat across from Thomas in his conference room, her posture rigid and her answers clipped. She refused to admit that the HOA had any responsibility for maintaining the park building's drainage system, claiming that it was the responsibility of the community as a whole, which somehow meant it was everyone's fault and therefore no one's fault. "Mrs. Patterson," Thomas said at one point, "are you aware that the downspout on the park utility building is in violation of municipal code?" "I am not an engineer, Mr. Chen. I do not know the specifics of every building code. But as the president of the HOA, is it not your responsibility to ensure that the association's properties are maintained in compliance with the law? We hire contractors to handle maintenance. If there is a code violation, it is their failure, not ours." "But you are aware that there is a downspout that discharges water onto a public sidewalk, correct?" "I am aware that there is a downspout. I am not aware of where exactly the water goes." "Have you ever inspected the building to see where the water goes?" "That is not part of my duties." Thomas closed his notebook, clearly frustrated. No further questions. In addition to the depositions, Thomas hired Dr. Novick to prepare a supplemental report that included additional analysis and photographic evidence. She also agreed to testify at trial, which Thomas said would be crucial. Expert witnesses carried significant weight with judges and juries, especially when the testimony was as clear and well documented as Dr. Novick's. The trial was scheduled for April 14th, nearly 2 months after the preliminary hearing. The night before, I barely slept. I kept replaying every detail of the case in my mind, worrying about what Pemberton might say or what evidence we might have missed. Thomas had assured me that we had a strong case, but I could not shake the anxiety that somehow the HOA would find a way to win. The morning of the trial, I dressed in my best suit and met Thomas outside the courthouse. The weather had finally warmed up, with temperatures climbing into the 50s and the last remnants of winter snow melting away. It felt almost symbolic, like the thaw represented a chance for a fresh start. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Several residents from Willow Creek had shown up, including Susan Delaney, the real estate agent who had questioned Brenda at the board meeting. Mrs. Hutchinson was there as well, sitting in the back with her arm still in a brace. I caught her eye and gave her a small nod, which she returned with a sympathetic smile. Judge Kowalski entered, and the trial began. Thomas presented our case first, calling me to the stand to describe what had happened and how I had maintained the sidewalk. I explained my routine of shoveling and salting, showed photographs of the ice and the downspout, and walked the judge through everything I had observed. Pemberton cross-examined me aggressively, trying to suggest that I had not been diligent enough, or that I should have noticed the problem sooner. But I held my ground, calmly answering each question and referring back to the evidence whenever possible. Next, Thomas called Dr. Novick to the stand. She was an excellent witness, speaking clearly and confidently as she explained her findings. She used diagrams and photographs to show how the water flowed from the downspout, across the sidewalk, and froze in the cold temperatures. She also testified that the downspout installation was improper and violated both building codes and best practices for drainage systems. "In your expert opinion," Thomas asked, "what caused the ice that led to Mrs. Hutchinson's injury?" "The ice was directly caused by water discharging from the downspout on the HOA's park utility building," Dr. Novick said firmly. "The downspout was clogged and improperly installed, causing water to overflow onto the sidewalk. In freezing temperatures, this water turned to ice. There is no question about the source. Could Mr. Walsh have prevented this ice from forming? No. The water was coming from a building he does not own or control. He could have salted the ice after it formed, but the water would have continued to flow and create new ice. The only way to prevent the hazard was to fix the downspout, which was the HOA's responsibility." Pemberton tried to poke holes in Dr. Novick's testimony during cross-examination, but she handled him with ease. She had done this dozens of times before and knew how to respond to every trick and tactic. By the time she stepped down, I could see that Judge Kowalski was convinced. Pemberton then presented the HOA's case, calling Brenda Patterson and Gordon Mills to testify about the bylaws and how they had always been enforced. He also called a representative from the insurance company that had paid Mrs. Hutchinson's medical bills, who testified about the costs involved. But none of it addressed the fundamental question of who had actually caused the ice. In his closing argument, Pemberton tried once more to argue that the bylaws trumped everything else. "Your Honor, this case is about upholding the rules that govern our community. If we allow Mr. Walsh to avoid responsibility simply because the water came from somewhere else, we are setting a dangerous precedent. Every homeowner will claim they are not at fault, and the system will collapse." Thomas stood for his closing, and his voice was calm but forceful. "Your Honor, this case is not about bylaws or precedent. It is about basic fairness. Mr. Walsh did nothing wrong. He maintained his property, he followed the rules, and he had no ability to prevent what happened. The HOA is trying to escape responsibility for their own negligence by blaming an innocent homeowner. We are asking this court to do the right thing and hold the HOA accountable for their actions." Judge Kowalski took a brief recess to review his notes, then returned to the bench. The courtroom was silent as he began to speak. "I have listened carefully to the arguments from both sides, and I have reviewed all of the evidence presented. This is a case where the facts are clear, even if the legal arguments are complicated. The evidence shows, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the ice which caused Mrs. Hutchinson's injury originated from a downspout on property owned and maintained by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Mr. Walsh had no control over that downspout and no ability to prevent the water from flowing onto the sidewalk." He paused, looking directly at Brenda Patterson. "The HOA's argument that their bylaws assign responsibility to Mr. Walsh regardless of fault is not persuasive. A contractual provision cannot require someone to do the impossible or hold them liable for the actions of others. To rule otherwise would be fundamentally unjust." I felt my heart pounding as Judge Kowalski continued. "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Walsh is not liable for Mrs. Hutchinson's injury or for any fines or penalties assessed by the HOA. Furthermore, I am ordering the Willow Creek Homeowners Association to reimburse Mr. Walsh for his legal fees and costs associated with this litigation. The HOA is also ordered to immediately repair the downspout and ensure that all drainage systems on their property are in compliance with municipal codes." He banged his gavel, and just like that, it was over. I felt Thomas clap me on the shoulder, and I exhaled a breath I had not realized I was holding. We had won. As we left the courtroom, several residents came up to congratulate me. Susan Delaney shook my hand and said, "I am glad you stood up to them. Brenda has been running that board like her personal fiefdom for too long." Mrs. Hutchinson approached as well, moving slowly with her cane. "Mr. Walsh, I am so sorry you were dragged into this. I never wanted anyone to get in trouble. I just wanted my medical bills paid." "It is not your fault, Mrs. Hutchinson," I said gently. "You were hurt and you deserve to be taken care of. I am just glad the truth came out." She smiled, her eyes moist. "You are a good man. I hope things get better for you now." Outside the courthouse, Thomas and I stood on the steps, enjoying the warm spring air. "How much do you think they will owe me for legal fees?" I asked. "Probably around 20,000, maybe more," Thomas said. "I will submit a detailed accounting to the court." You should receive payment within 60 days. And the downspout? They have 30 days to fix it or face contempt charges. Judge Kowalski does not mess around with his orders. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It had been a long, stressful battle, but it was finally over. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Susan Delaney. She had always been friendly, and we had exchanged contact information after the trial. The email was brief but shocking. Cameron, I thought you should know that several board members, including myself, have called for a special meeting to discuss Brenda Patterson's conduct during your case. There is a growing movement to remove her as president. I will keep you updated. I was not sure how to feel about that. Part of me was glad that Brenda might face consequences for her actions, but another part just wanted to move on and forget the whole ordeal. Still, I appreciated Susan keeping me in the loop. The special meeting took place 3 weeks later. Susan called me afterward to fill me in. Apparently, it had been contentious. Several residents had stood up and accused Brenda of overstepping her authority and wasting HOA funds on a lawsuit that should never have been filed. Others defended her, saying she was just trying to protect the community's interests. In the end, the board voted to remove Brenda as president by a narrow margin of 4-3. Susan was elected as the new president, and one of her first acts was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA. The apology came in the form of a letter, delivered to my mailbox on a sunny afternoon in May. It read, "Dear Mr. Walsh, on behalf of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, I want to sincerely apologize for the distress and financial burden you experienced as a result of our actions. Our previous leadership made errors in judgment that led to an unjust accusation against you. We are committed to ensuring that this type of situation never happens again. The downspout on the park utility building has been repaired, and we have hired a professional maintenance company to conduct regular inspections of all HOA properties. We hope you will continue to be a valued member of our community. Sincerely, Susan Delaney, President, Willow Creek HOA." I read the letter twice, then set it on my kitchen counter. It was not everything I had wanted, but it was something. An acknowledgement that I had been wronged and a commitment to do better. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA paid my legal fees, which Thomas confirmed totaled just over $22,000. I used some of the money to take a long, overdue vacation to Colorado, where I spent a week hiking in the Rockies and trying to forget about homeowners associations, downspouts, and ice. When I returned, I noticed that the park utility building had indeed been repaired. The downspout now properly discharged into an underground drainage system, and the sidewalk remained dry even during heavy rainstorms. It was a small victory, but an important one. I also started attending HOA board meetings, something I had never done before. I realized that part of the reason Brenda had been able to act so unilaterally was that most residents were apathetic and disengaged. By showing up and asking questions, I could help ensure that the board remained accountable. Susan Delaney turned out to be a much better president than Brenda. She was open to feedback, willing to admit mistakes, and focused on serving the community rather than wielding power. Under her leadership, the HOA implemented several reforms, including a formal appeals process for homeowners who disagreed with board decisions and regular town hall meetings to discuss community issues. One evening in late summer, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the cool breeze and watching the sun set over the neighborhood, when Susan walked by with her dog, a golden retriever named Bailey. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. She sat down and Bailey flopped at her feet, panting happily. "I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Brenda," Susan said. "I know it was not easy, but it really did change things around here. People are more engaged now. They are paying attention to what the board does. That is healthy for the community." "I did not do it to be a hero," I said. "I just did not want to be blamed for something I did not do. I know. But sometimes standing up for yourself inspires other people to do the same." We had 3 new people volunteer for board positions this year. That has never happened before. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as the streetlights began to flicker on. Then Susan spoke again. "Can I ask you something? Do you regret buying a house here?" After everything that happened, I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, no. I love this neighborhood. I love the parks, the trees, the sense of community. What happened with Brenda was awful, but it was not the community's fault. It was one person abusing their power. And now that person is gone. Susan smiled. "I am glad to hear that. We are lucky to have you here, Cameron." "Thanks, Susan. I appreciate that." She stood up and Bailey jumped to his feet as well, ready to continue their walk. "See you at the next board meeting." "Absolutely," I said. As I watched her walk down the street, I realized that the entire ordeal, as painful as it had been, had taught me something important. It is easy to stay silent when something unjust happens, especially when fighting back seems difficult or expensive. But sometimes you have to take a stand, not just for yourself, but for the principle of the thing. If I had given in and paid the HOA's demands, Brenda would still be president, the downspout would still be broken, and the next homeowner to get blamed for something they did not do would have no recourse. By fighting, I had not only cleared my name, but had also helped create a better, more accountable system for everyone in the community. That was worth every sleepless night and every dollar spent on legal fees. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to change color, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed over the past year. I had gone from being a quiet, uninvolved resident to someone who actively participated in community affairs. I had learned about HOA bylaws, municipal codes, and civil litigation. I had stood up to a bully and won, but more than that, I had discovered a sense of purpose. I started volunteering with a local nonprofit that helped homeowners navigate disputes with their HOAs, providing advice and resources to people who could not afford lawyers. It felt good to use my experience to help others avoid the same nightmare I had gone through. One Saturday morning in October, I was at the community center helping to set up for a neighborhood garage sale when a young couple approached me. They introduced themselves as Mark and Jennifer Torres, new residents who had just moved into a house on Oak Street. "We heard about what happened with you and the HOA," Mark said. "We wanted to thank you. The changes that Susan made after you won your case have made this a much better place to live. We almost did not buy here because we heard horror stories about the old board, but then we learned that things had changed." "I am glad it worked out," I said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Actually," Jennifer said, "we were wondering if you could give us some advice. We are thinking about joining the board, but we are not sure what is involved. Do you think it is worth it?" I smiled. "Absolutely. The more good people we have on the board, the better the community will be. I would be happy to tell you everything I know." We spent the next hour talking about HOA governance, community engagement, and the importance of holding leaders accountable. By the end of the conversation, both Mark and Jennifer seemed excited about getting involved. As they walked away, I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond my own victory. This was about building something better, something that would last long after I was gone. Later that day, as I was packing up from the garage sale, I noticed Brenda Patterson walking across the parking lot. She looked older somehow, diminished. She saw me and hesitated as if considering whether to approach. Then she changed direction and walked toward me. "Cameron," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge, "can I talk to you for a moment?" "Sure," I said, setting down the box I was carrying. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize. What I did to you was wrong. I was so focused on protecting the HOA from liability that I did not stop to consider whether we were actually in the right. I let my pride get in the way of doing the right thing." I was not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly how much stress and pain she had caused me, but another part recognized that it took courage to admit you were wrong. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "It was a difficult time for me, but I am glad it is over." "I heard you are helping other homeowners now," she continued. "That is good. I hope you can make a difference." "I hope so too." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused and looked back. "For what it is worth, you were right. About the downspout, about the bylaws, about all of it. I just could not admit it at the time. Thank you, Brenda." She walked away, and I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sympathy. She had made a mistake, a big one, but at least she had eventually owned up to it. That was more than a lot of people would do. As winter approached again, I found myself standing in almost the exact spot where Mrs. Hutchinson had fallen a year earlier. The sidewalk was clear and dry, even though snow was falling lightly around me. The repaired downspout was doing its job, channeling water away from the walkway and into the drainage system where it belonged. I thought about everything that had happened, all the stress and conflict and eventual resolution. It had been a year of growth, both for me and for the community. I had learned that standing up for yourself matters, that the truth eventually comes out, and that even the most entrenched systems can change if enough people demand it. A few days before Christmas, I received a card in the mail from Mrs. Hutchinson. Inside was a note written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Cameron, I wanted to thank you for everything you did. My wrist has healed and I am back to my normal activities. More importantly, I am grateful that you fought for what was right, even when it was hard. The world needs more people like you. Wishing you a wonderful holiday season. Sincerely, Eleanor." I placed the card on my mantel, next to a photograph of the repaired downspout that Dr. Novick had sent me as a keepsake. It was a reminder of what I had accomplished and why it mattered. On New Year's Eve, the community held a gathering at the park, complete with hot chocolate, music, and a bonfire. I stood near the fire, warming my hands and chatting with neighbors when Susan approached with a glass of cider. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As midnight approached and the countdown began, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, people I had fought for and alongside. This was my community, flawed but worth fighting for. And as the clock struck 12 and fireworks lit up the sky, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: hope. The following spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. The HOA decided to undertake a comprehensive review of all community infrastructure, hiring engineers to inspect every building, drainage system, and common area. It was an expensive project, but one that Susan insisted was necessary to prevent future problems. I volunteered to be part of the oversight committee, working alongside other residents to ensure that the inspections were thorough and that any issues were addressed promptly. We discovered several other drainage problems, none as severe as the downspout that had started everything, but all potentially hazardous. One by one, we fixed them. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it was also rewarding. Every repaired gutter, every cleared drain, every properly installed downspout was a small victory that made the community safer and better. By the time summer rolled around, Willow Creek had transformed from a place where problems were ignored or blamed on the wrong people into a community that took pride in maintaining its infrastructure and caring for its residents. Property values increased, new families moved in, and the HOA became known as one of the best managed associations in Springfield. I continued my work helping other homeowners navigate HOA disputes, and over time, I became something of a local expert on the subject. I gave talks at community centers, wrote articles for local newspapers, and even appeared on a local radio show to discuss homeowners' rights. Through it all, I never forgot where it started, standing on a frozen sidewalk, staring at ice that should not have been there, and deciding that I was not going to be blamed for someone else's mistake. That decision had changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. One afternoon in late July, I was working in my front yard, planting flowers along the walkway when a car pulled up and a man stepped out. He was in his 30s, casually dressed and carried a notebook. "Excuse me," he said, approaching with a friendly smile. "Are you Cameron Walsh?" "I am," I said, standing up and brushing dirt from my hands. "My name is David Chen. I am a reporter with the Springfield Journal. I am doing a story about HOA reforms in Illinois, and your case keeps coming up. Would you be willing to talk to me about what happened?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. Let me wash my hands and we can talk." We sat on my front porch, and I told him the whole story, from the first certified letter to the trial and everything that came after. David took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting details about specific events. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me thoughtfully. "This is an incredible story. You know that, right? You took on a powerful institution, proved they were wrong, and actually changed things for the better. That does not happen very often." "I just did what I thought was right," I said. "That is what makes it remarkable," David replied. "Most people would have given up or paid the fine just to make it go away. But you fought, and because you did, hundreds of other homeowners in this community are safer and better protected. That matters." His article ran 2 weeks later on the front page of the Sunday edition. It was a detailed account of the case, complete with photographs of the downspout before and after the repair, quotes from Dr. Novick and Susan Delaney, and a sidebar about HOA reform efforts across the state. The response was overwhelming. I received emails and phone calls from people all over Illinois, some thanking me, others asking for advice about their own HOA problems. The story even caught the attention of state legislators, who began discussing potential reforms to HOA laws that would provide better protections for homeowners and create more oversight of board actions. While those discussions were still ongoing, it felt like real change was possible. As autumn returned, and the leaves once again began to fall, I found myself reflecting on how different my life was compared to just 2 years earlier. I had gone from being a passive resident who just wanted to be left alone to an active participant in my community and an advocate for homeowners' rights. It had not been easy, and there were times I wished I could go back to my quiet, uninvolved life. But deep down, I knew I would not change anything. One evening in October, the HOA held a ceremony to dedicate a new community bulletin board that would provide information about board meetings, upcoming events, and residents' rights. Susan had asked me to say a few words, and as I stood in front of my neighbors, I felt a surge of emotion. When I first got that letter from the HOA blaming me for something I did not do, I was angry and scared, I said. I did not know if I could fight back, and I did not know if anyone would believe me. But I decided to try because I knew that staying silent would only make things worse. What I learned through this experience is that communities are only as strong as the people who are willing to stand up for what is right. We all have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable, to ask questions, and to demand transparency. If we do that, we can create a place where everyone feels safe and respected. Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of that process. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and several people came up afterward to shake my hand and share their own stories of dealing with difficult HOA situations. It reminded me that my experience was not unique. Countless homeowners faced similar challenges every day. The difference was that I had the resources and determination to fight back. Not everyone had that luxury, which was why the work of advocating for stronger protections was so important. As winter settled in once more, I found a rhythm to my life that felt balanced and purposeful. I continued working at the engineering firm, served on the HOA's infrastructure committee, helped homeowners navigate disputes, and even started dating someone I had met at one of the community events. Her name was Anna Foster, and she was a teacher at the local elementary school. She had moved to Willow Creek just after the whole Downspout incident had been resolved, so she knew the story but had not been directly involved. "I think it is amazing what you did," Anna said one evening as we sat in her living room, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. "A lot of people would have just given up. I almost did give up," I admitted. "There were times I thought about just paying the fine and moving away, but something told me that was wrong, that I needed to see it through." "I am glad you did," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "This community is better because of you." By the time spring arrived again, marking nearly 2.5 years since the initial incident, I felt like I had truly moved on. The legal battle was a memory, the downspout was fixed, and the HOA was functioning better than ever. Mrs. Hutchinson's wrist had fully healed, and she had even started attending the community yoga classes that were now held at the park twice a week. One Saturday morning, I was at the farmers' market in the park when I ran into Gordon Mills, the former board member who had always sided with Brenda. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but he approached anyway. "Cameron," he said, his voice gruff, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to support Brenda the way I did. You were right about the downspout, and we should have listened to you from the beginning." "Thank you, Gordon," I said. "I appreciate you saying that. I resigned from the board after everything happened," he continued. "I realized I was not doing a good job. I was just going along with whatever Brenda wanted instead of thinking for myself. That was not fair to you or to anyone else in the community." "It takes courage to admit that," I said. "What matters is that we all learned from it and did better." He nodded, looking relieved. "I hope so. Anyway, I wanted you to know that I am sorry." "Apology accepted," I said, and I meant it. As he walked away, I realized that forgiveness was a powerful thing. It did not erase what had happened, but it allowed everyone to move forward without carrying the weight of past mistakes. That was important, not just for me but for the entire community. That summer, Anna and I took a trip to Lake Michigan, spending a week at a small cottage near the Indiana dunes. We hiked, swam, and spent long evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the water. It was the kind of peaceful, restorative experience I had needed for a long time. One night, as we sat by a bonfire on the beach, Anna asked me if I ever thought about what my life would have been like if the HOA incident had never happened. "Sometimes," I said. "I think about how much simpler things would have been. But I also think about everything I learned and the people I met because of it. If it had not happened, I would still be going through life on autopilot, not really paying attention to what was happening around me. This forced me to engage, to care, to fight for something. In a weird way, I am grateful for it. Even though it was awful at the time, I confirmed. Anna smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. You are a good man, Cameron Walsh. I try, I said, wrapping my arm around her. When we returned to Springfield, I threw myself back into my advocacy work with renewed energy. I partnered with a state legislator to draft a bill that would require HOAs to provide homeowners with a formal appeals process and would impose penalties on boards that acted in bad faith. The bill was still in the early stages, but there was growing support for it, and I was hopeful it would eventually become law. In the meantime, I continued helping individual homeowners, providing advice and resources to those who felt powerless against their HOAs. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a victory not just for that person, but for the principle that fairness and accountability mattered. By the time the third anniversary of Mrs. Hutchinson's fall rolled around, the entire incident felt like ancient history. The community had moved on, the infrastructure had been improved, and the HOA was functioning as it should. But I never forgot the lessons I had learned or the importance of standing up for what was right. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was walking through the park with Anna when we passed the utility building where the faulty downspout had once been. I stopped and pointed it out to her. That is where it all started, I said. That stupid downspout. Anna looked at the building, then at me. It is hard to believe that something so small caused so much trouble. That is usually how it works, I said. Small problems become big problems when people refuse to address them, but it also shows that one person standing up can make a real difference. You made a difference, Anna said. Never doubt that. We continued our walk, hand in hand, through the park I had fought so hard to make safer. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors, children were playing on the playground, and neighbors were chatting on benches. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene, and I felt profoundly grateful to be part of it. As the years passed, my life settled into a comfortable pattern. Anna and I got engaged, then married in a small ceremony at the park pavilion. Many of our neighbors attended, including Susan Delaney, who gave a speech about how love and community were intertwined. Mrs. Hutchinson was there too, bringing a homemade cake that was absolutely delicious. I continued my advocacy work, and the HOA reform bill eventually passed the state legislature, becoming law in the spring of 2029. It was not perfect, but it provided real protections for homeowners and created mechanisms for holding boards accountable. I like to think that my case had played a small part in making that happen through it all. I never forgot the lesson that had been drilled into me during those difficult months. That standing up for yourself is not just about winning or losing. It is about refusing to accept injustice, about demanding that the truth be heard, and about creating a better system for everyone who comes after you. The downspout that started it all remained a symbol of that lesson. Every time I walked past it, properly installed and functioning as it should, I remembered what it had taken to get there and why it mattered. And every time, I felt proud of what I had accomplished, not just for myself but for my community and for every homeowner who would never have to face what I went through. Looking back now, from the comfortable vantage point of years and perspective, I can say with confidence that fighting the HOA was one of the best decisions I ever made. It was hard, it was stressful, and there were times I wanted to give up. But by seeing it through, I helped create a better, fairer community where people were not afraid to speak up and where leaders were held accountable for their actions. And really, That is all any of us can hope to accomplish. To leave things a little better than we found them and to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. The icy sidewalk that nearly ruined my life ended up teaching me that lesson, and for that, I will always be grateful.